Hello and welcome everyone to yet another interesting series by Drishti IAS. My name is Pragya. The year is about to end and the exams are also coming. So, to qualify the exam successfully, revision holds a very important place. Recap 2023 is going to be your one-stop solution to prepare, revise and succeed. In this series, we are going to cover all of the major events that have happened throughout the year, and this is going to be a quick revision series. In today's episode, we are going to discuss some of the important judgments that have been delivered by our courts in the year 2023. So let us begin. The first case that we are going to see today is the Supreme Court judgment on Jallikattu. So what is this Jallikattu? It is a bull taming sport. Bull sport that is prevalent in the state of Tamil Nadu in January every year when Pongal arrives. So what the case title is the Animal Welfare Board of India and others versus Union of India. So what were the major issues that were involved in this case? Let us examine. So the first issue is the upholding state amendments in the Tamil Nadu. So there were amendments made by the state of Tamil Nadu, and the major issue with these amendments were that are they violative of entry 17 of the concurrent list Then another major issue that was involved in this case was, is this practice of Jallikattu protected as a cultural right under Article 29 of our Indian Constitution? Then is the practice of Jallikattu unreasonable and arbitrary, and does it violate Article 14 and 21 of our Indian Constitution? That was also an issue. Some other issues involved in this case are, is the Tamil Nadu Amendment Act violative of Articles 15 Clause A, Subclause G and 15 Clause A, Subclause H of the Constitution of India? So this is a fundamental duty. We have a fundamental duty to protect the environment as well as develop the scientific temper. So on one hand, you are alleging that this sport is promoting animal cruelty. So is this violative of our fundamental duty as well? Then does the Tamil Nadu legislature has the power to amend the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1960? So these were the major issues that were involved in this case. The Supreme Court decided that these amendments were perfectly valid and allowed the practice of the bull taming sport Jallikattu in this case. The next major case which was delivered this year is the case on freedom of speech of ministers. So the case name is Kaushal Kishore versus the state of Uttar Pradesh through government of UP through its home secretary. So in this case, what happened was, there was an incident wherein a young girl and her mother were gang raped on NH 91, and a minister of the UP government at that point of time said that the incidents was just being framed to defame the UP government. So the major issue involved in this case was that, can the citizens claim their right to life and personal liberty under Article 21 of our Indian Constitution against the non-state actors or private individuals as well? And can the speech of or the statement of a minister be bound to the government or be collectively responsible to the government if it is linked to the state affairs? So the main issues involved in this case were the free speech rights of ministers, MPs and MLAs, then restrictions beyond Article 19 Clause 2 on these rights. So Article 19 Clause 2 talks about reasonable restrictions on the freedom of speech and expression. Okay, so could freedom of speech and expression or the restrictions, can they go beyond the scope of Article 19 Clause 2? So this was the major issue in this case. Then applicability of collective responsibility. So can the government be actually liable for a speech of minister if it is linked with the state affairs? Let us see what the Supreme Court decided in this case. The Supreme Court said that the freedom of speech of public officials cannot be restricted in favor of another person's fundamental rights. That means fundamental rights cannot be enforced against the private individuals or non-state actors. However, the Supreme Court held that state has an obligation to protect the fundamental rights of citizens even against non-state actors such as other private persons. And the Supreme Court also said that Article 19 Clause 2 of our Indian Constitution has an expansive scope. So, no restrictions could be placed beyond Article 19 Clause 2 of our Indian Constitution on the freedom of speech and expression. Another important case that was pronounced by our courts this year is on eco-sensitive zones. We have elaborately discussed the eco-sensitive zones in our Environment Primer series. So, the case name is T.N. Godavarman versus Union of India and others. So, what was the issue in this case? So, what happened was the SC said that in a previous judgment, the Supreme Court said that you have to establish a eco-fragile zone or eco-sensitive zone within the radius of 1 kilometer of the protected areas, national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. So, the center filed a review petition stating that this 1 kilometer buffer zone could not be applicable uniformly. It was getting very difficult to apply or implement the order of the Supreme Court. So, the major issues involved in this case are mandating a 1 kilometer eco-sensitive zone around protected forests, as I have explained, not only protected forests but national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. Then conflict between environmental protection and local needs. So, as you remember that there were protests in Kerala on this judgment of the Supreme Court. The locals were saying that we are completely dependent on the forest for our rights, for our basic needs. So, how can you hamper that? And most of these wildlife sanctuaries and national parks are heavily populated, densely populated. They carry a dense human population around them. Then previous Supreme Court orders on feasibility. So, these were the issues. And the center filed a review petition stating that it is getting very difficult to implement your order. Kindly modify your order. Now, let us see what did the Supreme Court say. The Supreme Court modified its earlier order. The Supreme Court observed that, okay, the eco-sensitive zones are created to protect the environment and not to interfere with the day-to-day lives of the local citizens. Then, exemption of areas with existing notification. For example, if an area is already protected, if an eco-sensitive zone is already created, then the order will not modify such areas. Okay. Then consideration of varying geographical conditions. Supreme Court considered in this case. However, mining still remains to be banned within 1 kilometer radius around national parks and wildlife sanctuaries, and mining cannot happen within national parks and wildlife sanctuaries as well. So, outside 1 kilometer radius also mining is prohibited, and within those spaces mining is prohibited. So, this was the Supreme Court judgment on the eco-sensitive zones. Another major judgment that happened this year is the applicability of section 497 of Indian Penal Code on the armed forces. So, as you remember, section 497 of the Indian Penal Code was decriminalized in the case of Joseph Shine versus Union of India. So, this is the revamped version of the case, named title as Joseph Shine versus Union of India 2023. What were the issues that were involved in this case? Applicability of adultery as a disciplinary offence in the armed forces, legal standing post decriminalization of adultery, and distinction between civilian and military legal frameworks. So, the Supreme Court in this case held that yes, although we have decriminalized section 497 of IPC in the Joseph Shine versus Union of India case, but we have nowhere stated that that cannot be applicable to the armed forces. So, what was the final judgment? The Supreme Court said that yes, armed forces personnel can be liable for committing adultery, even though section 497 of our Indian Penal Code was decriminalized by us. Armed forces personnel remain liable for disciplinary action for adultery, and there has to be a separate treatment of adultery in the military context, and that was upheld by the Supreme Court in this case. In fact, the Supreme Court said that the military personnel were governed by Article 33 of our Indian Constitution, and they can have separate laws as mandated by the central government. Okay, so armed forces personnel can still be liable for committing adultery as per the Joseph Shine versus Union of India case 2023. Then comes statewide action on child marriage. So this is another very important judgment that has been given by the Supreme Court. The case name is Society for Enlightenment and Voluntary Action and Another versus Union of India. So what were the major issues that were involved in this case? The major issues were enforcement of the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act, rising child marriage cases, and I'm not saying so. There has been data available like by UNICEF, by National Family Health Survey, that yes, in India, the girls are married between the age of 10 to 19 years. And the numbers are huge. Okay, so this case revolved around strict implementation of the Prohibition of the Child Marriage Act. Then government's policies effectiveness in preventing the Child Marriage Act. So what did the Supreme Court held in this case? The Supreme Court specifically directed the Ministry of Women and Child Development to submit a status report. Okay, and in that status report, the Ministry of Women and Child Development will highlight that the data of rising number of child marriages in states, then it will also highlight that what are the policies it is implementing to promote or to implement the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act. Okay, and Supreme Court also said that you need to appoint child marriage prohibitions officers. So all of this will be given in the status report by the Ministry of Women and Child Development. Then the Supreme Court also emphasized on effective law enforcement. So the Supreme Court is now stating that yes, the time has come to strictly implement the Prohibition of the Child Marriage Act. Another important judgment that has been passed this year is the petition regarding abortion of 26 weeks pregnant women. So this was again debatable. We have discussed it in the 26-week conundrum in our polity primer series, wherein we have discussed it in detail. So let me revise it for you very quickly. So the case name is X versus Union of India. As per section 228A of Indian Penal Code, we cannot disclose the identity of various female persons or sexual violence survivors or rape victims. So identity disclosure is not permitted. Okay, and that is why the case is titled as X versus Union of India. So what was the major issues that were involved in the case? Request for a 26-week pregnancy termination by a married woman who was suffering from postpartum depression, as well as she said that I already have 2 kids, I cannot support a third child physically and mentally. Then adherence to the Medical Termination of the Pregnancy Act. In under Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, a pregnancy beyond 24 weeks can only be terminated on the following 2 grounds. The first ground is mother's health is in danger. Mother's health is in danger. And the second ground is that there are fetal abnormalities. Okay, so only on these 2 grounds a pregnancy beyond 24 weeks can be terminated under the Medical Termination of the Pregnancy Act. So what did the Supreme Court decide in this case? The Supreme Court obviously rejected the plea. The Supreme Court was informed that the fetal was viable in nature. That means if you allow its normal birth, it will be able to survive on its own. Then stopping the hurt of the fetus will amount to feticide. The Supreme Court was informed of all of this, and that is why the Supreme Court said that there is no medical urgency to terminate the pregnancy. And if you will allow the termination of the pregnancy, then it will be violative of section 3 and 5 of the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act. And that is why the Supreme Court did not allow the termination of pregnancy in this case. Then emphasis on legal compliance of MTP Act, and then consideration of health aspects of both the woman and the child. Okay. Another important judgment that was passed this year was on manual scavenging. So the Supreme Court has made clear in very certain terms that we need to eliminate manual scavenging completely. So the case name was Dr. Balram Singh versus Union of India. The issue involved in this case was the eradication of manual scavenging and increasing compensation for severe death victims. So the Supreme Court in this case, as I have already stated, made certain in very clear terms that yes, there has to be a complete eradication of the practice of manual scavenging. The compensation was also increased to rupees 30 lakh in this case. Another major case that happened this year is the reinforcement of paper cup. So the case name is Tamil Nadu and Puducherry Paper Cup Manufacturers Association versus the state of Tamil Nadu. So what was the issue involved in this case? Ban on reinforced paper cups in Tamil Nadu and ban on non-woven bags. The Supreme Court in this case upheld the ban on paper cups, but the Supreme Court asked and directed reconsideration on the non-woven bag ban. Okay, another major case that happened this year was the decision on demonetization. Who can forget demonetization? The demonetization happened in 2016, in which the note denominations of rupees 500 and 1000 was demonetized by our government of India. So the case name is Vivek Narayan Sharma versus Union of India. The issues involved in this case are legality of the 2016 demonetization and the RBI Act provisions. The Supreme Court in this case held that the decision taken by the Union government 6 years ago to demonetize the currency notes of rupees 500 and 1000 denominations was completely valid. The majority held that the centre's notification dated November 8, 2016 is valid and satisfies the test of proportionality. Another major case that took place this year was simplification of right to euthanasia. In Common Cause versus Union of India, the Supreme Court had legalized the concept of a living will. Living will or advance directives. That means if a person is suffering from terminal illness or such illness and has no hopes, absolutely no hopes for survival, and is put on life support, that person can make a living will beforehand. A living and a sound person can make a living will stating that if I ever go through that situation, kindly remove my life support. And this was legalized by the Supreme Court in the Common Cause versus Union of India case. So the case name is Common Cause versus Union of India. The issues involved in this case are easing the guidelines for passive euthanasia and simplifying the advance directive process. So it was argued that the process was very tedious in nature, so the Supreme Court should simplify the process. The Supreme Court in this case held that they already simplified the guidelines adopted for executing living will and advance directives, and easier access to passive euthanasia, they made it possible through this case. So this is a very progressive judgment on passive euthanasia. Another judgment that took place this year is very important, that is the Supreme Court on Delhi government's control over administrative services. So GNCTD versus Delhi government has remained a constant issue. The Supreme Court said that the Delhi government has administrative control over the services in the state. So the case name is Government of NCT of Delhi versus Union of India. The issues that were involved in this case are control over Delhi's administrative services and authority of Delhi government versus LG of Delhi. So this was the contentious issue involved in this case, and definitely the Supreme Court, as we all know, decided in favor of the Delhi government that ultimately the Delhi government has a complete control on the administrative services in the Union Territory of Delhi. Then there were exclusion of certain key areas which are completely in the hands of central government, such as land, police and public order. We have discussed this GNCTD versus Delhi LG issue very elaborately in our Polity Primer series. You can watch the video there also. Another important case that happened this year was that the Supreme Court has refused to recognize the same-sex marriages. this is a very landmark judgment and a turning point in recognizing the right of queer peoples. So the case name is Supreme versus Union of India. The issues that were involved in this case are legal recognition of same-sex marriages and rights of queer couples. So the Supreme Court in this case stated that yes, they have a right to be treated at par with the other citizens of India. They are not a second class category of citizens. They are recognized as third gender. In fact, queerness is natural ability. It comes with your birth. It is not something which you cultivate, and it is not something which you practice as a matter of right. It comes very naturally to you. But apart from all of this, the Supreme Court said in its judgment that we cannot recognize same-sex marriages because that is not our prerogative. In fact, the Constitution of India guarantees no fundamental right to marry. So this was observed by the Supreme Court in this case. The Supreme Court, however, asked the center to look upon the matter and form legislations and committees in this regard so that they can form some civil union. Another major case that happened this year is the Rahul Gandhi defamation case, which ultimately led to his disqualification as a member of parliament. The case name is Rahul Gandhi versus Purnesh Ishwar Bhai Modi and others, and this case is specifically revolves around the Modi thieves remark by the Rahul Gandhi. Okay, so the major issues involved in this case are Rahul Gandhi's conviction in defamation case and his disqualification as MP. The Supreme Court has said in this case that disqualification not only affects the rights of the individual but also that of the electorate he represents in the parliament. The ramifications of his disqualification as a MP are void. The Supreme Court also said that there were lack of reasons given by the Gujarat High Court in imposing the maximum punishment, and the Supreme Court ultimately stayed his conviction. But the Supreme Court also cautioned him that his remarks were not in the good taste and he should remain very vigilant and careful about the public speeches he makes. Another important case that happened this year is the abrogation of Article 370, and this is the one of the major landmark judgments that happened this year. The case name is in Article 370 of the Constitution. The main issues involved in this case are abrogation of Article 370 and the special status of Jammu and Kashmir. So the Supreme Court said that Jammu and Kashmir does not have its own sovereignty, does not have its own sovereignty. Article 370 was a temporary provision. The Constitution of Jammu and Kashmir is no longer inoperative, and Constitution Order 273 was not made with malicious intent. So the final verdict came in the favor of the abrogation of Article 370. The Supreme Court upheld the Union government's action to abrogate Article 370, which granted special status to Jammu and Kashmir. The court further refused to comment on the constitutionality of the reorganization of the Jammu and Kashmir state, erstwhile J&K state, into two union territories, namely Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. So the Supreme Court said that we will be dealing with this issue separately, but as of now they upheld the abrogation of Article 370 in this landmark judgment. With this, we come to a conclusion of our today's discussion. We have discussed whatever landmark and major judgments that happened throughout the year 2023. I hope this session was insightful for you. If you have any feedback regarding this session, kindly drop it in the comment box below. If you liked today's discussion and found it to be helpful, kindly like the channel and subscribe our channel for more such interesting updates. Wishing you a very happy new year, and I hope you are preparing well for your examinations, and I hope this series is very fruitful for you. Stay tuned at 9 p.m. tomorrow for yet another interesting episode of the Recap 2023 series. Thank you.